No servant was meant to look up at the high table, and Alette had long since learned the trick of never seeming to. You kept your eyes on the wine. You let the great room blur past the rim of the jug, and you moved, and you poured, and you were no one. But on this night, the hall of Sindral held more candles than she had ever seen burning at once. More lords banked in more silver, more breath held all at the same instant, and every soul beneath that black and gold ceiling was waiting for the same thing. The kindling. It was the king's name at night. 29 years since the old queen had borne him in a winter that killed half the herds, and the whole realm had come to watch the years of Kavar, Alpha of Sindral, counted out in fire. At the center of the high table rose a great tiered stand of name candles, one flame for every year he had lived, and the hall glowed the color of a forge because of them. Only Alette knew that the candles were a lie. She knew it the way she had come to know a great many things she was not supposed to. 2 moons passed. A man had come alone and hooded to the low kitchen door where the servants took their air. A man who called himself a huntsman and had the wrong hands for it, hands that had never skinned anything. He had come back the next night, and the next. He had learned her name before she learned his. By the time she understood that the huntsman was the king himself, walking out of his own crowded loneliness to sit with a girl who did not bow, it was already too late to be careful, and she had not wanted to be. He had pressed his mouth once to the inside of her wrist in the dark, and said a word over it in the old tongue that she felt more than heard. Since that night, the small mark left there had never gone cold. It sat under her sleeve now, like a coal banked in ash, warm against the pulse, and she had told no one, least of all him, that a second warmth had begun to grow beneath her heart. 3 weeks passed. For 6 days now he had sent her nothing. No word. No sign. And so, like a fool, she had carried her tray into this hall, to see with her own eyes what the silence meant. Now she saw. The lords of House Malreath sat nearest the fire, and their daughter Sorel sat nearest of all, gowned in white and waiting, her pale hands folded as though the thing were already done. The High Warden lifted his staff. He spoke of alliance, of the northern passes, of blood joined to blood, and Alette felt the floor tilt beneath her, because she understood at last that this was no birthday at all, it was a binding. The name candles were the flame of a marriage rite. The bride was chosen, and the groom sat rigid in his great chair and said not one word. She might have borne even that. A king was a king. She had always known the ending of this. But then the servers were waved back, and the incense was carried forward, and Alette caught the smell that rose off the burning candles as the resin took, and every hair on her arms stood up. It was wrong. Under the honey of the wax there was something green, and bitter, and old, a smell she knew from the swamp country where she was born. A smell her grandmother had called the sleep of the will. Wolf's root, worked into the wax, so that the smoke of his own name would climb into the king and quiet the animal in him, and leave behind a man who would say yes to anything, sign anything, take any hand held out to him over the fire. They were not marrying him, they were emptying him. Sorel rose. She lifted her white hand toward the flames, toward his, and the smoke bent and thickened, and Alette watched the amber go dull in the king's eyes, like a lamp guttering behind glass. And she knew that in the space of one more breath, the man who had learned her name would be gone, and no one in this shining hall would ever know he had been stolen in plain sight. Alette did not decide to move. She was simply moving. She crossed the dais. No servant was permitted to cross. She reached the great stand of name candles before a single guard thought to stop a girl with a wine jug, and she filled her lungs with all the air her body would hold, and she blew. 29 flames went out at once. They should not have. No breath of one small woman douses a rite kindled by a warden of the realm. The sacred fire is meant to bow to no one below a king. But the dark came down over the high table, like a dropped cloth, sudden and total, and in that dark the mark on Alette's wrist woke and burned up bright, a thread of live gold, shining clean through her sleeve, for the whole hall to see. The king drew a breath like a man surfacing from deep water. His head turned, his eyes found her, clear and amber and terribly awake, and around them 1,000 caught breaths made a sound like wind through winter trees. Seconds later, in the sudden dark, the entire hall understood exactly why the fire had died for her. For the space of 3 heartbeats, no one in the hall of Cinderelle moved, and Alette believed, wildly, that she had won. Then, Lord Malreath rose from his seat beside the dead candles, and leveled one long finger at the serving girl standing in the smoke, and named her the thing that would follow her into the dark for the rest of her life, witch. The word went through the hall like a crack through river ice. A common girl had snuffed a warden's sacred fire with a single breath, and her own flesh had lit with a light no honest woman carried. There was no telling of the mark at her wrist that did not damn her. Guards were already moving. Sorel was weeping the careful tears of a bride denied, and her father was speaking quickly now of sacrilege, of poisoners, of a creature sent to bewitch the king on the very night of his years. And Alette saw with an awful clearness how neatly the trap had 2 jaws. If the smoke had taken him, they would have owned a king. It had not, and so instead, they would own the story, and the story would say that she was the danger and he the victim she had almost destroyed. The king was on his feet. He was trying to reach her, and 3 of his own sworn men were holding him back by the arms, as though gentling a spooked horse, murmuring that he was unwell, that the witch had clouded his mind, that he must sit, he must rest, he must let them tend to him. The dull glaze had left his eyes, but the strength had not yet come back into his legs, and Alette understood that the half of the binding, which had not broken, still dragged at him, that he could not save her, and that if she stayed 1 moment longer, they would put her in irons, and there would be no leaving at all. A hand closed hard around her elbow, not a guard. Old Wenna, who ran the low kitchens, who had slapped Alette's fingers from the honey 100 times and covered for her 100 more, was already hauling her back into the smoke and the confusion with a strength her stooped shoulders had no right to hold. "Down the ash stair, girl," Wenna breathed against her ear. "Now, while they still argue over whose fault you are, go to the marsh gate. Do not stop for your things. Do not stop for anything. Wenna, the king, they are taking. The king cannot help himself tonight, let alone you." The old woman pressed things into her hands, a heel of bread, a few thin coins, a fire striker. Her eyes were wet and fierce. "You carry more than yourself out of here. Do you think I have not seen it on you? Run. Keep it safe. And do not you dare come back." So Alette ran. She went down the black ash stair with the roar of the hall shrinking behind her, out through the marsh gate where the reeds began, into a night with no moon and a cold that reached straight through her thin serving dress to the small warmth beneath her heart. She did not look back at the lit windows. She had learned long ago the price of looking back. She was almost to the tree line when the sound came over the walls. It was not a shout, and it was not a horn. It was a voice, one voice, raised into a howl that was half a man and half a wolf and wholly out of its mind. And it was calling across the dark for the one thing she had never told him, the single secret she had carried into that hall and was now carrying back out of it, alone. He was calling for his child, and the marsh gate had already boomed shut behind her. By the time the frost broke in the Low Country, the woman who served at the Drover's Rest in Marrowdale had almost convinced the village that she had always been there. She called herself Nell. Now, she had walked south for 11 nights, sleeping in barns and once in the hollow of a fallen oak, until the swamp gave way to farm country. And an innkeeper with more tables than hands took one look at her belly and her steady eyes, and asked none of the questions she was not ready to answer. She carried trays again. She learned the names of the drovers and the wool factors and the tin men who stopped along the road, and she poured their ale and remembered their orders, and let them think her a widow, which was its own kind of true, for the man she had loved was as good as dead to her. and she to him. She was good at the work, better than the inn deserved, and the innkeeper's wife had begun to leave the counting of the night's coin to her. It was the nearest thing to trust that Nell had been shown since Wenna shoved bread into her hands, and she let herself have it. A woman could not live on grief and a growing child alone. She needed some small warm thing to hold, and being quietly good at honest work was a warmth no one could reach in and take. But at night, when the inn went dark and still, the other warmth would not let her rest. The mark on her wrist had not faded. By every law her grandmother had ever taught her, it should have. A claiming broken, a mate cast off, a bond denied before the whole waking world, any of these should have cooled the thing first to a scar, and then to nothing at all. Instead, it kept its low-banked heat through every one of the long weeks, waking her before dawn with the certainty that somewhere very far off, something was awake and reaching for her, and would not stop. She dreamed of him. That was the cruelest part. She dreamed of amber eyes, gone clear and desperate, of a low voice saying her name, her true name, into the dark over and over, as though he meant to pull her back along the thread of the sound. She would wake with her hand pressed flat to her wrist and the taste of his grief in her mouth, and she would tell herself, sternly, that a dream was only the mind worrying an old wound, and that a bond thrown down before 1,000 witnesses stayed down, unless it had never been the one bond denied by the one side, unless the thing between them had two ends after all, and the far end had never let go. Nell pushed the thought down where she kept the rest of them. Then, on a gray morning, near the turning of the season, with a tray of emptied cups balanced against her hip, and the common room loud around her, the mark at her wrist, that had smoldered so patiently for so long, went suddenly and searingly hot. Hot as the moment his mouth had first touched it. Hot as a live coal pressed flat to the skin. The cups slid from the tray and shattered across the floor. Because somewhere to the north, after all this time, something had finally caught her scent. The peddler, who brought the news to the drover's rest, did not know he was setting it down in front of the very woman it was about. He was a tin and needle man, road-worn and glad of a warm bench, and he paid for his ale in talk, the way such men do. Nell would have filled his cup and moved on, but the word Syndrel stopped her feet, as surely as a hand laid on her shoulder. "The whole capital's gone strange," the peddler said, to anyone who would lean toward him. "I was there at the breaking of the frost, and I'll not go back. They say the king lost his wits on his own name night, some sorcery at the feast, a sacred fire that died the wrong way, and he has not been right since." Nell kept her eyes on the jug and let the room blur, the old trick, but her heart had begun to strike hard against her ribs. "Wrong how?" asked the wool factor by the hearth. "Wrong in every way a king can be." The peddler lowered his voice, which only drew the benches closer. "He tore down the marriage they made him that very night, put the great house that made it out of his own counsel. And now he rides the length of the realm, hunting one woman, and heaven help whatever stands between him and the finding of her. Some say she is a witch, who cursed him at the feast. Some say she is a woman he lost, and that he will pull the kingdom apart, stone by stone, before he stops." A murmur went round the room. Nell poured, and did not spill, and thought that pride was a strange thing to feel with the floor gone to water beneath her. "And the land feels it," the peddler went on, warming to the horror of the tale. "The game has gone out of the northern woods. The rivers run low for the season. Herds drop in the byre with no sickness a man can name. They are calling it the sulking, the land gone sullen with its king. There is a writ nailed in every market square, from the capital to the fens, a great sum for the woman alive, and a greater warning for any soul that shelters her. Alive." Nell turned the word over and found no comfort in it. A witch was burned alive. A lost love was brought home alive. The same word opened two doors, and she could see through neither one. She had known, since the gray morning, the cups shattered from her hands, that the heat in her wrist meant he had turned toward her at last. It had not cooled, once, in all the days since. It pulled north now, low and constant, the way a needle pulls toward a lodestone, and no law she had ever learned would tell her whether the thing coming down that pull meant to save her or to end her. She learned the answer sooner than she wished. That dusk, with the supper trade thinning, and the light going blue over the fields, the dogs of Marrowdell began to howl and would not stop. Nell went to the shutter with a stack of bowls still in her hands. At the margin of the marsh, where the reeds gave way to the last of the trees, shapes stood watching the inn. Not travelers, not the villagers, lean hounds. They were wolves, 5 of them, gray and silver and greater than any wolf had a right to be, and their eyes held a steadiness that no beast of the woods had ever turned on her. The mark on her wrist flared so bright she felt it through the sleeve. The hunt had come to Marrowdell at last, and Nell stood frozen at the shutter, with the bulls going cold in her arms, unable to tell whether she was looking at her rescue or at her death. The bulls were still in Nell's arms when the knock came, and it was the knock that frightened her, not the wolves. A wolf could not rap its knuckles on a door. A wolf could not stand on the step of the drover's rest in the shape of a man and wait to be let inside. Whoever had come out of that tree line had done it on 2 legs, which meant this was no chance hunt of animals, but something sent, something with a purpose, something that had known exactly which door, of which inn, in which forgotten village to choose. The knock came again, unhurried. Mistress Nell, a man's voice, low and worn. I know you can hear me. I have traveled a very long way, and I have not come to harm you. Open the door, and I will show you my hands. Every sense Nell owned told her to bar the latch, wake the house, and pray. But a barred door had never once, in the history of the world, kept out a wolf that truly wanted in, and the innkeeper and his good wife slept in the loft above her, and they had shown her nothing but kindness since the night she came footsore and lying about her name. She would not buy herself 1 more hour of breath with their blood. If death had walked up the road for her, then she would meet it here on the threshold and keep it there. She set the bowls down without a sound. She took the short knife from her belt, the one she used for rind and twine, and she felt how small it was against the memory of those wolves. Then she lifted the latch. The man on the step was old for a warrior, his dark hair gone to iron at the temples, his face cut deep by weather and by grief. He held his open hands out from his sides as he had promised. But it was his eyes that undid her, for they fixed on her and filled, not with the triumph of a hunter at the end of a long chase, but with something perilously close to relief. My name is Corin, he said, first among the king's sworn. And you are Alette, of the Marshfens, who served in the low kitchens, who put out the name Fire on the night of the binding. His gaze dropped, only once, to her sleeve, where the mark lay hidden beneath the cloth. You carry the king's claiming on the inside of your wrist, and beneath your heart you carry a great deal more. The knife trembled. She had told no living soul of the child, not Wenna, who had guessed it from her face. Not the innkeeper's wife, who suspected it and held her tongue. No one in all the wide world knew, and yet here the truth of it stood, spoken plainly on her own doorstep, by a stranger with a king's crest at his collar. How can you know that? She whispered. Because the king has spoken of little else for 2 seasons now. Corin's voice roughened. Because there is not a wolf left in Sindrall who does not know the mark on your wrist by heart, or the name he calls out in his sleep. My lady, he has not been whole since the marsh gate shut behind you. He is dying by inches for the want of you, and he is not the only danger walking this road tonight. Behind him, far out past the reeds, a horn sounded, thin and cold. Corin turned his head toward it, and every trace of relief went out of his face. They are closer than I feared, he said. May I come in? What I have to tell you cannot be said on a doorstep, and we may not have long to tell it in. Nell stepped back from the door, and Corin came in alone, and the small room of the Drover's Rest seemed to shrink around the size of what he had come to say. He would not sit. He stood turning his gloves over in his scarred hands, and he told her the thing she had spent all these long months refusing to let herself hope for. You broke the right, but you did not break it clean, he said. Half the binding shattered when the fire died. The half that held is what saved his life, and it is also what has damned him. He woke enough to know you that night, and to know what had been done to him, and to howl the roof half off the hall, but he did not wake all the way. House Malreath had planned for a king who would sign whatever they set in front of him. What they got instead was a king they could neither rule nor be rid of. So they did the next best thing. They kept him. Kept him? Nell echoed. Shut away, and called it care. Mad, they told the realm, cursed by the witch who fled in the night. They have ruled in his name all this long while, his own body fighting the poison left in his blood, his wolf clawing at the walls of him, and looking only for you. Corin's jaw worked. The men who guarded his door tell of a king who would not eat, who paced the same 3 strides of stone until his feet left blood on it, who spoke long hours to the empty air as though you were standing in it. The bond you left burning in his wrist is the only thing that kept the animal in him from swallowing the man whole. It kept him alive to be a prisoner. And 1 moon passed, it kept him alive long enough to tear the door from its hinges, put down the guards Malreath had set on him, and walk out of his own castle into the cold, following the one warmth he had left in all the world. The heat in Nell's wrist pulsed, as though it had heard itself named. Then he comes for the woman he loves, she said, and hated how badly she needed the words to be true. Not for the witch, he has never once believed in the witch. Corin met her eyes without flinching. But the men behind me tonight do not care in the least what he believes. Lord Malreath keeps his power only so long as the realm holds you a monster and holds the king a lunatic. You are the one witness left alive who could stand up in a market square and say the fire died because a true bond broke a false one. And there is worse than that, my lady, though I hold only pieces of it. He paused, choosing the words with care. A common girl's breath does not snuff out a warden's right. Yours did. Malreath has spent months and a mountain of gold trying to learn what runs in the blood of the marsh fens, and whatever he has found there frightens him more than the king ever has. He does not want you tried. He does not want you questioned. He wants you gone, and the child in you gone with you, before either one of you can be understood. Nell's hand had come to rest over her belly, without her willing it there, and for the first time the fear she felt was not for herself alone. There is a writ for my burning, she said slowly, to keep the crowd fed and looking the right way, but the writ was never meant to reach me first. No, Corinne's voice dropped to almost nothing. For you he sent quieter men, and they carry no torches, and read out no charges. They were perhaps a day behind me when I turned off the high road. That horn tells me I was wrong. It tells me they are already here. As if the word had summoned it, the hounds of the village fell silent as one, the way beasts go still when a greater hunter walks in among them. Then, out of the dark, beyond the shutters, came the soft and wrongful sound of many feet moving in step through the reeds, and one voice, calm as a man remarking on the weather, giving the quiet order to close in. Corin drew his blade, and set his shoulder between Nell and the door. "Behind me, my lady," he said. "They have come for us both. Before the reeds give up the shapes moving through them, let us take one breath together, you and I. If the fate of Alette and her stolen king has fastened itself to you now, follow this channel, so the next tale can find its way to you, the way the bond found its way to her, across all those cold miles. There, it is done. Now, come back into the dark, where the killers have already reached the door." The first blade came through the shutter, not the door. It split the old wood where Nell had been standing a breath before, and buried itself in the far wall, still humming, its edge wet with something that was not water. If Corin had not already swept her down to the floorboards with one arm, it would have gone clean through her throat. "Stay low," he said. And then, he was not a man anymore. She had never watched a wolf come out of a person so close. His shape tore open and remade itself between one word and the next, and where the old warrior had knelt, there was suddenly a great, gray beast, filling half the little room, and it went through the door and into the yard with a snarl that shook the cups on their pegs. Nell scrambled up. Through the broken shutters she saw them. The quiet men, 6 or 7 dark figures, moving without haste. The way men move when they have done this many times before and expect no trouble they cannot handle. They carried short blades and long, and every edge caught the light wrong, greased with the same wet shine as the one in the wall. 2 of them peeled away from Corin's fury and started for the inn door. For her, and above her head, she heard the innkeeper's wife cry out, startled from sleep, "The house!" The good, foolish, kind people who had taken her in. Something in Nell that had been holding its breath since the night the flame went out, finally let go. She had been told to hide the thing in her blood since before she had words for it. Her grandmother had pressed her small hands flat and whispered that the fen fire was death for a common girl, that they burned what they could not name, that a woman with embers in her veins learned to keep them banked, or learned nothing at all. So she had banked them, she had put herself out, over and over, year upon year, until she was only Nell with the steady hands and the quiet eyes. She was done putting herself out. She lifted her hands, and the mark on her wrist raced up her whole arm in a thread of white gold, and she let the fen fire come. It came like a breath. Let go. Light bloomed off her open palms, not the red of a hearth, but the hard, clean white of a star. And the 2 men in the doorway flinched back from it, as though she had thrown open a furnace. She did not throw it at them, not yet. She swept it wide, a curtain of pale flame across the threshold, and where it passed the poisoned blades hissed and smoked in their fists, and they dropped them, swearing, beating at their sleeves. "Down to the cellar, both of you," she called up to the terrified faces at the loft rail, and her voice rang with something that was not only her own. "The fire will not touch you. Go now and bar it behind you." They went. Outside, Corin's wolf had gone down under 3 of them. Nell saw it through the broken wall, saw the gray body driven into the mud, saw the dark shapes closing to finish him, and she did not think. She walked out into the yard with the white fire streaming off her like a torn banner, and she brought it down on the killers hunched over him. They came apart from him screaming. One rolled into the reeds, trailing smoke, and did not rise again. The others broke and ran, and Corin dragged himself half upright, his gray flank laid open, and steaming in the cold, and Nell knelt in the freezing mud and laid both burning hands against the wound. It was not the soft green healing the wise women did. It was fire, and it closed the torn flesh the way a hot iron closes it, cruel and quick, and the wolf under her hands shuddered and held still and let her do it and live. She had time to think that she had never in her life felt so awake. Then the last of the quiet men stepped into the yard, and this one did not run from the fire, and this one wore a mask of pale gray ash. "So the fen keeps its promises after all," the masked one said, a woman's voice, dry as old paper. She lifted not a blade, but a small clay vessel, unstoppered, and from it rose a thread of that green and bitter smoke. Nell would know until the day she died. The sleep of the will. "Put it out, girl, or I put you out." The smoke reached for her, and Nell felt her fire gutter in answer, felt the terrible heaviness begin to climb her arms, and understood that whatever this creature was, the wolf's root answered her, the way it had answered no one else. Her light sank low, her knees found the mud, and the tree line behind the ash-masked woman came apart. It was not that a wolf ran out of it. It was that the trees themselves seemed to leap aside for the thing that passed between them, a black shape vast beyond any beast Nell had a name for, moving so fast the eye lost it, and found it and lost it again. The ash-masked woman had time to turn. She did not have time to raise the smoke a second time. The black wolf took her out of the world between one of Nell's heartbeats and the next, and the clay vessel shattered on the stones, and its poison thinned into the honest cold and was gone. Then the great wolf turned, and its eyes were the amber she had watched go dull behind glass on the night the fire died, and they were clear now, clear and wild and fixed on her, as though she were the only steady thing in all the turning world. It crossed the yard. To her, slowly, it lowered its enormous head. And with a gentleness that made no sense in a thing so plainly made for killing, it pressed its brow to the small curve of her belly and held it there, and a sound came out of it that was very close to weeping.
Kaivar!
Nell whispered. The wolf was gone. A man knelt in the mud in front of her, shaking, his hands lifted and hovering a breath from her, afraid to land. And the king of Sindril looked up at her with his face wet and open, and said her name. Her true name, the one no living soul had spoken aloud since the marsh gate closed behind her. For a long moment Nell could only look at him, this ruin of a king kneeling in the filth of an vineyard, and feel the whole careful wall she had built around her heart shift on its foundation. He had not aged so much as worn away. The strong lines of him were still there under the hollows the seasons had carved, but there was gray now at his temple that had not been there before, and his hands, when he finally let them settle featherlight on the swell of her belly, trembled like an old man's. "You are alive," he said, as though he were reading it off her face and did not quite believe the letters. "You are alive. And you are." He could not finish it. His eyes had dropped to where his hands rested, and whatever he felt move beneath them, small and certain, undid whatever was left of him. He did not ask to touch her. He was already touching her, and he looked up stricken, as if he had taken a thing not offered, and began to draw back. Nell caught his hand and pressed it flat where it had been. The child turned under his palm, unhurried, as though it had only been waiting to be noticed, and the king of Sindril made a sound she had no word for and bowed his head over her belly and wept in earnest. She let him. For the length of it she let herself have it too, the warmth of his hands, the weight of his brow against her, the thing she had told herself 100 cold nights she would never feel again. Then the memory of the hall came back to her, and the smoke, and the 6 silent days before it, and she pulled away. "Do not," she said, and hated the crack in it. "Do not kneel there and weep as though you are the one who lost everything. You went silent on me 6 days, Kaivar, 6 days and not one word, while they dressed a bride in white, and I stood in your hall, with your child inside me, and no notion in the world of what I had become to you." He rose. He did not reach for her again. He had learned that much in the space of a minute. "I went silent because they had already begun," he said low. "I did not know it for a trap. I knew only that my counsel had folded itself around me like a fist, that every road to you had a Malreath man standing on it, that the letters I sent came back with their seals unbroken, and the servants I trusted were dismissed before dawn. I thought." His voice failed and came back rougher. "I thought, if I did not go to you, if I gave them no reason to turn their eyes your way, you would be safe in the low kitchens until I understood what was closing around me. I was wrong. I was so far wrong that I have not stopped paying for it since. You let them brand me a witch. I could not stand." The words came out of him like something torn loose. "You had put the fire out, and half of it broke, and the other half had its hand around my throat, and I could not make my own legs bear me while they carried you off into the dark. Do you know what it is to watch the one thing you love hunted out of a room, and to have your own body fail you? I have had every day since to learn it. I have learned nothing else so well." Nell's anger did not vanish. It only stopped being the whole of what she felt. "I thought I had dreamed you," she said, quieter. "Every night you came to me in the dark and said my name. And every morning I told myself it was only my own grief wearing your face. He went very still. You heard that? I heard it until I thought it would drive me mad. They were not dreams. He said it, the way a man confesses. When they had me caged and the wolf could not reach you awake, it reached for you asleep. I did not know you truly heard me. I knew only that I could not stop calling, waking or sleeping, and that somewhere on the far end of the burning in my wrist, you were still there, or I would have been gone long before. The mark between them, his and hers, pulsed at the very same instant, and Nell felt through it, undamned for the first time, the whole size of what he carried, not the tidy grief of a king in a tale. The real thing, vast and clawed and worn to the bone, and beneath it, holding it up, a love that had refused every good reason to die. Her wall came down. There was nothing grand in it. It simply came down. The way a riverbank gives after a long rain, all at once, and without a sound. I waited for you that night, she said. I had the words ready. I meant to tell you about the child after the feast, when you came to me. I practiced them until they were smooth. Her voice broke on the smoothness of it, and instead I watched them empty you out, in front of the entire court, and I ran. And I have not stopped running since. Kavar crossed the small space between them, and did not touch her, only stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him, and left the choosing to her. She was the one who closed it. She put her face against his chest, and his arms came around her slowly, as though she might yet break in his hands, and over her head she felt him shudder once, all the way through like a man setting down a weight he has carried past the edge of his strength. Corin's voice came from the shadows at the yard's edge, careful, apologetic. My king! Kavar did not let her go. Speak. The one she burned the ash mask. Corin came forward into the low light, still favoring the leg her fire had sealed. It was the flame binder herself, Sorel's own aunt, the hand that worked the wolf's root into the wax. Malreath did not send hirelings for this, sire. He spent his own blood to be certain it was done. Nell felt the king turn dangerous in her arms. Then it is not a hunt anymore, Kavar said. It is war. He put her gently from him and looked out into the dark past the reeds and lifted his head and let out a call unlike the broken thing she had heard over the marsh wall the better part of a year gone. This one was low and long and full of command, and out of the whole black rim of the marsh, answer came. Voice after voice after voice, until the night was one great chord of them, and shapes began to slip from the tree line, gray and black and brindle, a dozen more wolves past counting gathering to the king, who had finally called them to a purpose. They have followed me the length of the realm, Kavar said, waiting for me to be their king again instead of their grief. Tonight, I am their king again. He turned back to her, and the tenderness in his ruined face sat strangely beside the fury beneath it. We ride for Sindril at first light. Malreath will answer for all of it, in the open, before the whole realm that watched him work. Will you come, or will you make me put you somewhere safe, and hate me for it? Despite the mud and the blood, and the dead cooling in the reeds, something almost like a smile pulled at Nell's mouth. You could not put me somewhere safe if you tried, she said. You never could. They rode for the capital through the last of the dark, and up into a gray dawn, and Kayavar kept her before him on the saddle the whole way. One arm barred across her, like a thing he did not mean to lose twice. She had told him she could ride her own horse. He had looked at her until she stopped saying it. The wolf will not have you out of reach, he said against her hair, and she felt how little of it was a jest. So long it has been reaching. Let it hold what it has caught for one morning. I will earn the argument later. So she leaned back into the worn strength of him, and let the miles fall away, and as they went he told her the rest. The parts Corinne had not known to tell. He told her of the room they had kept him in, a fine room with a barred window, where they brought him wine he would not drink, and physicians he would not let near, and a priest who came each week to assure him his witch was surely dead by now. He told her how he had counted the days by the burning in his wrist, how on the days it flared he knew she lived, and on the days it only ached, he lay on the stone and could not move for fear that the ache meant the end of her. He told her haltingly of the morning he understood they would never let him out, that he would die in that fine room with the realm believing him mad, and how the thought that finally put him through the door was not his crown or his freedom, but a single certainty that his child, if there was a child, would grow up believing its father had chosen a stranger over its mother. There was a child, Nell said softly. There is. His arm tightened. I know it now. I think some part of me knew it that first night, in the hall. It is why I howled the way I did. The wolf counted before the man could. She was quiet a moment, feeling the truth of it settle into her. And when you found the room empty, that first morning, and knew I was gone. She did not make it a question. I do not remember most of the year that came after with any order to it, he admitted. I remember sending wolves to every corner of the map. I remember 100 villages, and 100 faces that were not yours, and going down on my knees in 100 strange doorways, to breathe the air, and be sure you had not passed through it. I remember only that the burning never let me stop. I have you to thank for that. Had the mark cooled even once, I think the man in me would have died, and left the realm nothing but the beast. She turned in the saddle to look at him, and the thing that had been broken between them for so long was not broken after all. Only bruised, only mending. And she leaned up and kissed him. It was nothing like the careful kisses of the huntsman at the kitchen door. This one had all those months of dying in it, and the moment her mouth found his, the bond woke all the way, both ends at once, and she gasped against him as everything he felt poured through the open channel and mixed with everything she felt until she could not have said whose heart it was that hammered so. When they broke apart, the gray dawn seemed brighter, and the king of Sindral was breathing like a man who had been underwater a long while and had only just remembered air. For a little while they rode without speaking, and it was not the old silence of the 6 lost days, but something wholly other, a quiet, with both of its ends joined. She could feel him now behind the wall of her own thoughts, a steady, low warmth, and once a flicker of pure wonder crossed it, that she knew at once was his, and knew that he had just felt the child turn. When this is finished, he said, unsteady, and you are safe, and there is nothing left in the world that wants you dead, I will ask you a question I have no right to ask yet. Not before. Ask it now, she said. I may not be alive by dusk, that, he said, is precisely why I will not. They crested the last rise as the sun cleared the hills, and Sindral lay below them, and Nell felt the king go rigid at her back. The city was wrong. Smoke stood over the eastern quarters in 3 separate columns, too orderly for accident. The great gates hung open and unwatched. And above the castle, where the king's own banner should have flown, a new standard cracked in the dawn wind, the pale gray field and white flame of House Malreath. But it was not the banner that turned Nell cold. It was the roads. From every direction, thin dark rivers of people were being walked in toward the capital, herded along the fen roads and the hill roads and the river road, by riders with pale gray badges at their shoulders. The whole countryside emptied and driven toward the walls as though to a festival. No festival ever moved so quietly. No festival left that particular silence hanging over it. The silence of a great many souls who have been told exactly where to stand and warned exactly what will happen to them if they do not. He is gathering witnesses, Kavar said, very low. Whatever he means to do, he means the whole realm to watch it done. A rider came pounding up the road toward them, one of Corin's scouts, his horse blown and his face gray as ash. Sire, thank the moon. He hauled up hard. They know you are coming. Malreath means to be crowned through his daughter before ever you reach the walls. He has called the whole city to the great hall at midday. For a new kindling, a coronation fire, to name the Lady Sorrel Queen and Regent and yourself dead of your madness. The scout swallowed. And he means to light it with traitors. Sire, he has taken every soul who ever spoke for you, every servant who ever showed the fen woman a kindness. They are to burn at the lighting of the new fire, as a cleansing, to teach the realm what becomes of those who shelter witches. Nell's blood turned to ice. Wenna. The scout looked at her not knowing her, and nodded all the same. The old kitchen mistress is first on his list, my lady. She is to set the pyre alight with her own hand, or be the first upon it. Nell was already gathering the reins her king had never fully given her. Then we do not reach the walls at midday, she said. We reach them now. The wolves of Sindril came down on their own city like a grey flood, and the gates that had been propped wide for a crowd let in a reckoning instead. It was over almost before it began in the outer wards. The city had never loved House Malreath. It had feared them, which is a different thing, and the moment the true king's wolves poured howling through the streets, the fear turned and found itself a new direction. Malreath's hired swords fell back toward the castle. The people who had been herded out to cheer a coronation began instead to melt into doorways and alleys and cheer something else entirely. But the great hall itself stood sealed, its bronze doors barred from within, and Nell knew, without being told, what waited on the far side of them. The pyre, the prisoners, Wenna. Kavar had shifted back to a man on the castle steps, to take the fight on two legs at the head of his sworn, and he found her at his shoulder where he had ordered her not to be. Nell. There was no room in his voice now for gentleness, only fear. I cannot break that door, and guard you at once. Stay with Corin, stay behind the shields. I am begging you. They will light the fire the moment you break the door, she said. You know they will. The instant those hinges give, Malreath drops the flame to spite you, and Wenna, and 30 others burn before your wolves. Our 3 strides into the hall. She took his face in her hands, mud and blood and all. There is only one person in this city Malreath will open that door for. The one witness he needs dead. If I walk up to it and offer him the thing he wants most in all the world, he will not burn his own leverage. He will take me first. And that will buy you the door. No, it came out of him raw. No. I did not tear the world apart to find you so that you could walk into his hands. You are not sending me. She held his gaze. I am going. There is a difference, and you know that better than anyone. And then, because it was true, and because she had never said it aloud and might not have another hour in which to, she said it. I love you, Kavar. I loved you when I believed you had thrown me out of your life. I loved you through every mile of the running. I am not going to stand safe behind a shield and let a kind old woman burn for the crime of having been good to me. Not while I have breath in me, and you, of all men, know exactly what my breath can do. He looked at her for a long, terrible moment, and she watched him understand that he could hold her body in this world, but that he had never once been able to hold her will, and that her will was the second thing he had fallen in love with. Corin, the king said, without looking away from her. Take 20 to the sally door. When she is through the front, you come through the side. His jaw was iron. No one lights anything and lives. Nell walked up to the great bronze doors of the hall, alone, unarmed, her hands open at her sides, and she called out in a voice pitched to carry through bronze. Lord Malreath, it is the Fen Witch. It is, the woman, your whole realm has been nailed to a wall to find. She heard the sudden hush behind the doors. Open and take me, and you need burn no one. Keep them shut, and the king comes through them, and you will have nothing left to trade. You have one breath in which to choose. I am rather good with breaths. The bar scraped back. The doors swung wide, and Nell stepped into the great hall of Sindral, for the second time in her life. It was as she remembered it, and nothing like it. The same vaulted dark, the same iron chandeliers, but where the high table had stood, there was a pyre now, raw green wood, stacked to the height of a man, and roped to the stake atop it, Straight-backed and unafraid stood old Wenna, with 30 trembling souls, chained in a line at the pyre's foot. On the dais above them all, in a gown of coronation white that Nell had last seen at a birthday feast, stood Sorel of House Mowry. Beside her, one hand on the great unlit torch, and the other on his daughter's shoulder, stood the Lord himself. "Run, child," Wenna called down, her old voice cracking across the hall. "You foolish, foolish girl, I told you never to come back." "You did," Nell agreed. "I have never been any good at listening," Lord Mulreath smiled, and it was the smile of a man just handed the last piece he had been missing. "Bar it again," he told his guards, and the doors boomed shut behind her. "Bind her hands, and be gentle about it. I want her whole for the fire. It is a poor cleansing that does not begin with the witch herself. They came for her wrists." And that was the moment the child chose to wake. It began as warmth, low beneath her heart, the same small, certain warmth she had carried all these months, except that now it was climbing, spreading out through her like a sunrise coming up under her skin, and Nell understood with a lurch of terror and wonder that it was not her own fen fire this time. It was answering her fen fire. 2 lights, hers and a smaller, fiercer one, braiding together, and the braid of them was more than her body had ever been asked to hold. The guards reaching for her stopped. Golden light was spilling now from the mark on her wrist, from her open hands, from the very center of her, and the whole hall had gone silent to see it. "What is this?" said Lord Malreath, and for the first time his voice had lost its silk. Nell did not answer him. She could not. The light was becoming everything, and the old power of the marsh fens was rising in her blood, the way a flood comes up a river. And somewhere far back at the ruined doors, a great bronze weight began to shudder under a king's fury. She had one clear thought before the change took her whole. Not yet, she begged it. "Let me reach the fire first." The bronze doors did not open. They came off their hinges. The king of Sindril came through the ruin of them in the shape of the Black Wolf, vast and terrible. And the guards who had reached for Nell's wrists forgot her entirely. And Lord Mulreath, who had spent his stolen seasons, proving he would sooner rule a ruin than lose it, did the thing Nell had known in her bones he would do. He reached for fire. He snatched the coronation flame from its sconce, the first small light of the new kindling, and flung it down into the green wood at Wenna's feet, and the pyre caught with the greedy roar of wood that has been soaked in oil for exactly this purpose. Wenna did not scream. She lifted her chin and searched the smoke for Nell. And Nell let go of the last thing she had been holding back. The change came, and it did not come as pain, or, not only as pain. It came as release. 2 seasons and a whole life of smothered fire let go in one breath. Her body remade itself in a blaze of white and gold, bone and breath and blood, answering a call older than House Mulreath, older than the kings of Sindril, old as the marsh fens themselves. Where a bound and kneeling woman had been, there rose a wolf, the color of a flame's white heart, wreathed in light. And every soul in that hall who had come to watch a witch burn fell to their knees instead, because there is a thing men know when they see it older than any story a lord can nail to a wall. And it is the difference between a witch and something holy. The white wolf turned to the pyre, and drew the whole of the hall's air into her, and breathed out. It was the same breath she had spent on a stand of birthday candles half a year ago. It was nothing at all like it. The force of it crossed the great hall and struck the roaring pyre, and put it out, root and branch, every greedy tongue of flame, snuffed in a single held instant, and left 30 prisoners standing in a sudden fragrant dark, whole, unburned, gasping. And in that dark, as had happened once before, a light remained. The mark blazed on the white wolf's foreleg, gold and living. And clear across the hall on the foreleg of the great black wolf, the answering mark blazed to match it. Twin fires burning in the dark for all the realm to see. calling to each other across the wrecked hall the way they had called across 2 seasons and 100 cold miles. The entire hall understood, at last and altogether, exactly what it was looking upon. Not a witch, and the king she had cursed. A true bond, the first in 5 royal generations, sundered by a lie and refusing, even now, to die. Sorel understood it first, and her coronation white went the color of the ash her aunt had worn. The wolf set her gently down onto 2 bare feet in the center of the silent hall, and she stood there in her plain servant's dress with gold light still dying at her fingertips, and she was not afraid of Lord Malreath at all anymore. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. Written plain across his gray face, he had learned at last what ran in the blood of the marsh fens, and it had been standing in his kitchens the whole time, pouring out his wine. "The fire chose," Nell said into the ringing quiet, and her voice carried to the last dark corner of the hall. "It chose on his name night, and it chose again just now, in front of every one of you. A sacred flame does not die for a witch. It dies for the truer flame. You have, all of you, seen, now which of us the fire will not burn." "Seize her," Malreath said, but his voice cracked on it, and no one moved. And that was the moment his 3 borrowed seasons ended, in the sound of an order that no one obeyed. He reached instead for the long knife at his own belt, the last resort of a small man, and lunged, not at Nell, but at the nearest chained prisoner, at Wenna, to make of her death one final scrap of leverage. He never reached her. The black wolf was between them, and then the man was, Kyavar catching the lord's knife arm in one hand and bearing him down onto the stones of the hall he had stolen, and holding him there, not killing him, though the whole room could see how badly the wolf in him wished to. "No," the king said, and it was for himself as much as for the beast. "Not quiet, not in the dark, the way you have done everything else. You will answer for this, where they can all of them hear it." He lifted his head to the hall, to the kneeling city, to the wolves filling the broken doorway. "Take him. Take his daughter. The kindling is void. It was void the night you poisoned it, and it is void now, and there is not a soul in this realm who did not just watch the fire itself say so." They took him. They took Sorel, who did not struggle, who only stared at Nell as though at a door that had stood open her whole life without her once seeing it. And then it was quiet, and Kyavar turned to Nell, across the wreck of the hall, and crossed to her, and for a moment, neither of them could find a single word. "You are unhurt," he finally managed. His hand hovered over the curve of her belly, and this time she took it and pressed it there herself, and felt the child, quiet again, its fierce small work all done. "Both of you, both of us," she said. "It woke to save us. It's fire and mine together. I did not do this alone." He made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and pressed his brow to hers. "There is a bond half made between us," he said against her mouth. "It is burned in my wrist all this while," one ended, holding me together by its fingernails. "I would have it whole. But it was your breath that broke the false right, and it must be your choice that seals the true one. I will not take it from you. Ask me, and I am yours to the last of my days. Refuse me, and I will spend those days glad only that you are alive to refuse." Nell looked at the ruined king, who had torn a kingdom apart to find her, and she did not make him wait. "Kneel," she said softly, "one more time, not to beg, to be claimed." And the king of Sindral, before the whole of his gathered realm, went down onto his knees a final time, and tipped his head back and bared the strong line of his throat to a fen-born serving girl with embers in her blood. She set her mouth to the bare pulse beating there, and she bit down, gently, and set her own claim on him at last, sealing what a lie had tried so hard to steal. The bond went whole between them with a sound she felt rather than heard, a great low note like a bell struck under deep water, and everything he was poured into, everything she was and did not stop. She saw the fine barred room through his eyes. She felt the endless dark of the caged months, the days he had marked by the heat in his wrist, the exact shape of the fear that had finally driven him through a locked door. And he saw the marsh gate closing, and the long walk south, and the cups shattering on the floor of the drover's rest, and the child kicking in the dark while she told herself that a bond thrown down stayed down. There were no secrets left between them. There was no room left for one lie of Malreath's making to hide in. When she lifted her mouth from his throat, they were both shaking, and both, at last, whole. "My queen." "My king," she answered, and around them the hull of Sindral that had come to witness a burning lifted its voice instead in a sound that shook the old stones down to their roots. The judging of House Malreath was done where the man had least wished it, in the open, before the assembled packs and the whole staring city. He was stripped of his name and his lands, and given over to the far northern marches, to live out his days as small and as forgotten as he had tried to make her. Sorel, who had lit no fire and worn no mask, was sent down into the fen country she had helped to slander, to learn from the marsh women what their blood had always truly been. It was said she went quietly, and that in time she stopped watching the doors for someone come to take her. The realm mended the way a bond mends, slowly, and then all at once, the game came back to the northern woods. The rivers rose to their proper marks. The herds that had sickened for no reason a man could name grew fat again, and the old folk left off calling it the sulking, and began to call it simply the year the king came back to himself. They had feared the fen woman would frighten the people. She did not. Wolves know the truth of a bond when it stands before them, and the people of Sindral had all of them watched a sacred fire refuse to burn her, not once but twice, and had drawn their own conclusions long before any herald arrived to tell them what to think. And on a still evening, as the days drew in, at the quiet hour when the hall lit its lamps against the early dark, Nell was brought to bed, of a single child, a daughter, with her father's amber eyes, and, when she was frightened or fierce, a faint gold warmth that rose in her small wrist like a coal banked in ash. Kavar held his daughter as though she had been made out of the light itself. "I have a question," he said to Nell, who lay tired and shining in the great bed, "that I have owed you since a grey dawn out on the road. I have no right to ask it. I am going to ask it anyway." "Ask it," she said, so he asked. And she gave him the answer she had carried down every cold mile of her running, and it was yes, and it had always been yes, and it would go on being yes past the end of both their lives. That night, and every night after it, the king of Sindral lit a single candle in their chamber with his own hand, and let it burn all the way down to nothing, and did not once look away from it, marveling. For the whole of his life, he had been taught that a flame was a thing you guarded against the dark. His wife had taught him that it was also a thing you could choose, and put out, and kindle again, and that some fires, once they are truly lit, do not go out at all. Thank you for spending this while in the Hall of Sindral with me. If Alette and her king found some place in your heart tonight, leave a word below to tell me so, and follow along, for there are more such tales waiting to be told, and I would dearly love for the next of them to find you.